Chapter 10. Old Hannah's Child. In the morning sun, the desert floor sparkled with what looked like white frost. Everywhere near the tamarisk trees, women and children were picking up the thin white flakes. Tirzah sat on her heels and carefully lifted a flake. It lay in her hand as light as a feather and cool to her touch. So this is the bread Moses meant, she thought. It was unlike anything she had ever seen. Gently she began to gather the tiny wafers into her basket. She was finished before Oren and started back to the tent. Ephon, the only child of Hamiel, the cart maker, joined her. Glad for the company, Tirzah waited for her. Ephon was broadly built like her father, her hands large and strong. Tirzah knew that the girl worked like a son with her father, helping him fashion the heavy cartwheels. She was a cheerful girl, though she seldom had time for anything but work. Tirzah liked her and secretly admired Ephon's strength. Ephon carried 2 large baskets holding as much as Tirzah's and Oren's together. Since there were only 3 in Ephon's family, Tirzah was curious. Moses' instructions were to gather an omer for each person, no more, no less. She couldn't help asking, "Ephon, are you gathering bread for another household?" Ephon shook her head. No, Father's order this morning was to gather enough for 2 days because tomorrow I will be needed to help him fix an axle for Shobal's cart. You know that we are a large family, though we are but 3. She laughed at her joke and went on. So I thought I had better take enough to satisfy our appetites for both days. Tirzah wondered if Ephon's reasons would satisfy Moses. Oh, well, I suppose in your case it's all right to gather for 2 days. As she said the words, a little twinge of guilt pinched her inside. She ignored it and went on chatting with Ephon about the coming day's small events. As soon as the morning sun had turned hot, the white flakes of manna vanished like the morning dew, leaving no trace on the ground. Tirzah's supply of manna, as it was called, baked into a delicious bread, was the faint taste of honey. She was sorry when the last of it disappeared into Ram's mouth. They were full now, but what about tomorrow? Come, Tirzah, and help me clear these bowls away. Her mother's voice broke into her thoughts, making Tirzah blurt out, "Will there be more tomorrow? Manna, I mean. Do you think it will come again?" Leah's eyes were surprised. "I never thought of there not being more. Why shouldn't there be more? Didn't Moses say we would have bread to eat? Didn't he say not to leave any of it overnight, not one bite? Why shouldn't it be there tomorrow and the day after that?" Her mother picked up a mat and carried it into the tent, letting Tirzah know that the conversation was ended. Tirzah sighed as she lifted a small crumb from her skirt. She hoped her mother was right. In the morning, as soon as the dew lifted from the ground, Tirzah hurried to look. It was there, white flakes everywhere around the trees and shrubs. Yahweh's gift of bread had come again. With a little dancing step, she set her basket down and began to gather the wafers. A footstep behind her made her turn to look. "Ephon, but I thought you would not come today. What happened, Ephon?" Ephon's face was red, her eyes swollen as though she had been crying. "I told Father what Moses said, not to take more than 1 day's worth. This morning there was no manna left in our jar, nothing but a stinking mass of worms." She screwed up her face at the memory of it. "Father blames me, though I had nothing to do with it. Now I must hurry and get back to help him before he gets into such a temper as he will never get out of this day." Ephon bent quickly to her work, and Tirzah went on with hers. She was sorry for the girl who really wasn't to blame to her father's stubborn ways. Again, when the sun became hot, the manna disappeared. Tirzah wasn't worried. They had enough for today, and tomorrow she would gather more. On the day before the Sabbath, she and Oren brought home a 2-day supply, just as Moses had instructed. This time it didn't go wormy or smell. On the Sabbath morning there was no manna lying on the desert floor. A few people who had counted on it went home with empty baskets. A lone hawk hung motionless on the air high above the rocky ledge on which Ram sat. He could have spent this Sabbath in the camp talking lazily with the others, but the wilderness had drawn him like a magnet. Something in him felt the desert's emptiness as if it were a part of him. Overhead the hawk soared. Like the bird, Ram felt alone. He had changed. In Egypt, he'd been a child, but no more. The hawk was circling, climbing higher as if inspecting the desert below. Shading his eyes, Ram watched the bird search for its food. Its sharp eyes were a wonder, and even at that great height not a creature as small as a mouse would escape its sight. Ram turned away stricken. Why had he been so blind? He had fallen once into the trap of foolishly following after his uncle Shobal and the others who refused to believe Moses. Closing his eyes, he whispered, "Surely, Yahweh, you showed your might through your servant Moses. Who could doubt your wisdom now?" But he had doubted. Why was it that one moment his heart was light, knowing his father's love for him was unchanged, and the next wretched, empty, worthless? Would he doubt the next time his faith was tested? Was he destined to be a failure? After a long while, Ram opened his eyes, saw that the hawk was gone, and let himself down from the ledge to the rocks below. His sandals made little sound as he stepped from rock to rock, watching carefully for the small scorpions that like to shelter from the heat in the shadow of the boulders. Halfway down he stood still and listened to a muffled sound coming from somewhere close by. At first Ram thought it was a small animal snuffling, but as he listened he was sure it was a child crying softly. Cautiously he made his way around a large overhanging rock toward the sounds. Suddenly he stood directly in front of the small huddled figure of a girl, her face streaming with tears. The fear that leapt into her face startled Ram. "It's all right," he explained quickly. "I didn't know you were here. I'm sorry. Look, if you've hurt yourself, I can go and get help." He felt the awkwardness of his words even as he said them. The girl was obviously not harmed. She was an Egyptian girl, probably one who had fled Egypt as a servant to one of his people. Hastily, she got to her feet, backing away from him toward the rock wall. "I'm fine now. Thanks. It's nothing." She brushed the wetness from her face, then looked up at him, her chin set defiantly, much like Tirzah's, Ram thought. "Well then, if you are all right, I'm glad. My name is Ram." He stood awkwardly, not sure whether to leave her or not. The girl bowed her head slightly and replied, "I am Mary, servant to Hanna, the midwife." Ram knew that old Hanna no longer practiced her midwifing, though some still called her by that name. "I'm going to the camp that way now," he said. "Shall I walk you back?" A flush of deep color rose in the girl's cheeks. "Oh no, I must run back quickly. I've been gone too long already." In a single leap, she was on the rock below him, scampering like a deer lightly down to the desert floor. Ram watched her half amused, half admiring the girl's quickness. She would be safely back at camp long before he arrived there himself. Something glittered on the rock and caught Ram's eye as he turned to go. It was a bracelet, small enough to fit a slender arm. The girl's, perhaps? He picked it up and examined its finely carved silver closely. He could make little of the markings. Though it looked like Egyptian writing, Oren might know. Stuffing the bracelet into the pouch at his belt, he leapt to the next rock. He would have to find her and return the thing. As he reached the ground, he wondered again why she had been crying. At Hannah's tent, Mary paused for breath. She had run all the way. This time no young children had pelted her with small stones the way they had yesterday as she bent to draw water for herself and Hanna. She could hear their voices all over again when she thought of it. "Dirty, dirty Egyptian! Go home, go home!" The child who had started the chant was a boy of about 6 or 7. Mary had hurried away as quickly as she could. The tent flap was up, and Mary stepped quietly inside. Old Hanna sat nodding over a half-eaten honey cake. Home, Mary thought. Where is home now? Gently she removed the cake from the gnarled fingers and laid it nearby. She would go and draw water for them now while others rested. Then she remembered. On the Sabbath all work was forbidden. Tomorrow she would find another way, perhaps in the afternoon when the sun grew too hot even for the children. It was hot now, and Mary undid the long black braid of hair that hung to her waist. How often Passer had told her that she was blessed with the most beautiful hair in Egypt. It was true that it grew unusually thick and would wave and curl about if she let it. She shook it out now, smoothing it, then braiding it tightly once more. Finishing, she rubbed her cheeks to erase all tear marks, feeling again the squareness of her face. She was plain. Hair or no hair. She had gone to the house of Peleg as she was, dressed in her Egyptian clothes, the same ones she wore now. Thoughtfully, she smoothed the soft linen she was so used to. Maybe she could make herself more like the Hebrew women, dress like they did so she wouldn't stand out. Behind her, Hanna woke with a little snore, and Mary knelt at her feet. "What is it, little bird, that makes you look so thoughtful?" Hanna asked, her old eyes awake and sharp. She listened to Mary's plan, nodding now and then in approval. When they were done, Mary turned round and round for Hanna to see. "The wool robe was loose and simple. From top to bottom you look like I did when I was a girl," the old woman said softly. "Yahweh has been kind to me," Mary said. "I hope you will not mind that I dress like his people." Hanna drew the girl to her for a moment, then held her at arm's length. "If you will obey Yahweh's words and listen to them carefully, will he not be pleased with you? You too have fled Egypt and turned away from all the gods of Egypt to Yahweh, and he has brought you safely here." The old woman paused and placed a thin hand under Mary's chin. "In all the years I have laid many babies in their mother's arms. Not once have I had a child of my own. Do you think Yahweh brings me a child in my old age? One who will be more comfort to me than I can be to her?" Mary's eyes brimmed with tears. "I will be a daughter to you as long as Yahweh lends me breath." Hanna chuckled. "May that be longer by far than what I expect he shall lend me. These old bones have lived a long time. I only hope they will last until we get to the promised land." Anxiously, Mary watched Hanna make her way slowly and painfully from the tent. She would care for the old woman, see that she rested more and ate well. If only she would not die and leave her here alone. Please, Yahweh, please do not let her die, she prayed.